This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Hannan.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, we have breaking news today. Hamas freed the last American-born Israeli hostage, Edan Alexander, as Israel presses on with its Gaza assault in its 71 blockade of all aid, all food, water, and medicine coming into Gaza. This was a rather dramatic development as the Trump administration almost exclusively did this deal with Hamas, speaking with Hamas directly and excluding Netanyahu and its right-wing extremist government in its totality. A real interesting development. We're also going to talk about a very interesting development. 3 years ago, an Israeli soldier killed Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, and finally, his identity, the murderer, has been identified. Very interesting story. We're going to be covering that. You know, Jamal, the number of Palestinians killed by Israel from October 7th, 2023 until June 2024 could be as high as 109,000 per a recent report in the Lancet. And when we look at downstream, secondary, long-term consequences of this genocide, the death rate could be even higher. And of course, the World Central Kitchen has run out of ingredients to feed hungry, starving civilians in Gaza. And a recent estimate put out today by the United Nations said that 209,000 Palestinian children are on the precipice, on the verge of immediate death because of starvation. It's a grim situation. We're going to be covering all those stories today, Jamal. But before we do that, we're going to watch an interview that you did with Canadian author and activist Yves Engler, discussing the upset victory of the Liberal Party candidate Mark Carney as Prime Minister of Canada, defeating the Conservative Party leader, who was a diehard supporter of Israel. He ended up losing his seat in the parliament, too, in his recent article about how a foreign policy that is truly a force for good. Yves Engler explains how Carney's actions so far are not a turn for the better. So it's interesting to see what's happening north of the border in Canadian politics. A lot to cover today, Jamal.
Yeah, so let's start by watching Yves Engler. In an upset victory, Canadians elected Liberal Party candidate Mark Carney as Prime Minister, defeating Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre, who had been leading by a wide margin as recently as 4 months ago. Poilievre had also lost his seat in Parliament that he had held for over 20 years to Liberals as well. The election was seen as a referendum on Trump and which candidate would best manage his hostile tariff policies and repeated calls to make Canada the 51st state. This made Carney the more appealing candidate for many, who, in his victory speech, warned Canadians that Trump is trying to break us. For their part, Canada's strong Israel supporters felt crushed by Poilievre's loss, as he has been a long-standing die-hard supporter of Israel, even pledging to move the Canadian embassy to Jerusalem if elected. But will Carney be a principled leader when it comes to the genocide in Gaza and other Palestine and Israel-related issues? Or will his policy remain the same, only wrapped in softer rhetoric? In his recent article, How About a Foreign Policy That Is Truly a Force for Good?, Yves Engler explained how Carney's actions so far are not a turn for the better. Yves is a Montreal-based activist and author who has published numerous books, the most recent of which is Canada's Long Fight Against Democracy. Welcome back to Arab Talk, Yves.
Thanks for having me.
So would you contribute the rapid turnaround in party support completely to what is being called a Trump bump? If so, did the Canadians view Poilievre and his policies as too similar to those of Trump, and is this what made them choose Carney instead?
Yeah, I think there's two main issues that happened here. Justin Trudeau, it'd been a decade of Justin Trudeau, and as is normal, politicians start grading on people, and I think people just wanted a change of face. So there was a dynamic of Trudeau leaving that in and of itself assisted Carney and or assisted the Liberal Party. Of course, Carney is Trudeau's Liberal Party, and so is Carney, and Trudeau was clearly supportive behind Carney. But then there's the other side to it, which is the Trump effect and the fact that Pierre Poilievre, he was very much as people have put it, a Timbit Trump. Timbit being the Tim Hortons, the little donut of the well-known Canadian donut chain, and so he was really kind of mimicking Trump, echoing Trump. And so there was a rejection of Trump style politics. Some of the most egregious ones were the fact that he was saying he was going to defund universities, as Trump is doing this attack against universities in the U.S. Over anti-Semitism was, Palestine solidarity activism. And so yeah, I think that two things came together. Poilievre is a more ideological leader than other conservative party leaders, and so he was viewed as not going to be very good at standing up to Trump, and going to very much mimic Trump's policy. And the numbers were quite remarkable. I mean, I think it was a poll like 4 months ago, it was up like 27 points. It was looking like the Liberals were going to get completely wiped out, and instead they didn't get quite a majority, but they're 3 seats away from a majority government, which is a pretty remarkable turnaround in 3 or 4 months.
Has Carney said or done anything leading up to the election or following his election that indicate he might take a stronger stand against Israel's genocide and in support of Palestinian human rights?
I would say that he has. So Trudeau left office like 48 hours before leaving office. He spoke to an anti-Semitism forum, which is really just a pro-Israel forum, and he declared himself a Zionist again. And he said no one should feel bad about being called a Zionist, or no one should feel ashamed, or some of it. I am a Zionist. He said that. So this is, of course, 18 months into a genocide, 77 years of ethnic cleansing, etc. And so I think, is a true believer in terms of Zionism and Jewish supremacy. Justin Trudeau. Mark Carney, he made a few declarations. He seems to suggest he believes there's a genocide, and then he kind of walked it back when a heckler yelled that at him. And he's made a few ex posts. He quit. One of the reasons he won because he has this sort of impressive resume as the former governor of the Bank of Canada and then the governor of the Bank of England. But he hasn't really taken many positions on that many issues. He doesn't have a whole lot of political baggage, unlike his competitors in the Liberal Party race. And then even during the actual election, he took as few positions as possible. So and I actually saw him in September, and I tried to question him on the Holocaust in Gaza. I saw him at an event on the street, and he refused to respond, and he kind of shooed me away, and it was kind of an interesting little clip. But no, he hasn't, expressed solidarity with Palestinians. He's made a few declarations. His chief of staff, he did appoint this Marco Mendocino as his interim chief of staff. Marco Mendocino is this aggressive Zionist liberal MP. So there are definitely indications that he's definitely part of the liberal establishment, which is decidedly, pro-Israel. But my sense is that he's setting up to be a little bit less anti-Palestinian than Justin Trudeau.
You are involved in many protest and activist events. Is Canada increasing measures to repress dissent as the United States is? And you mentioned actually the chief of staff or interim chief of staff, Marco Mendocino. And he has what's labeled or called as the bubble zones, for example.
Yeah, there's been a whole push, and Vaughan, a suburb of Toronto, adopted this a few months back now, and the city of Toronto is going through this big process of potentially adopting these bubble zones. And basically, what these are is that in response to protests against some Israeli soldiers speaking, and then one was a land theft sale, Israeli real estate sale. There were protests at in front of some synagogues, in front of some Jewish community centers, and the hardline Zionists tried to whip up a big storm about that and have pushed this whole idea of basically restricting protests in front of religious institutions, schools, etc. And so this is one of the more repressive measures that's circulating in response to opposition to Canada's complicity in the genocide. And Carney has during the election campaign he made a post saying that he was in favor of these type of zones. It's a fairly vague comment that he made. And it's not exactly clear how that would play out at the federal level. I'm not a lawyer, but most of this would come down to municipal kind of policies, I would think. So I would say that the repression is not obviously as severe as what Trump has done, and that I was somewhat scared about Poilievre. I don't like the conservatives in general, but I think Poilievre was going to pursue a more aggressive, repressive policy, kind of mimicking Trump. But for the most part, it hasn't been as aggressive as we're seeing in the U.S. Now, there have been some pretty stunning repressive measures. The most egregious one was back in October, when the Canadian government listed the Samidoun Palestinian Political Prisoners Network as a terrorist organization. They did that in conjunction with the U.S., but I'm pretty sure in this case it was actually really coming from the Canadian government. It was the force pushing this at the behest of the Israel lobby, of course. And this is a solidarity group is based in Vancouver, or partly based in Vancouver, and they are a grassroots organization organizing demonstrations. The director Charlotte Cates was targeted in really kind of brutal fashion, picked up or house raided by the police. And this is just with no evidence. They just sort of said no one claimed they were involved in any violence. They claimed that they had connections to the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, which is also a banned terrorist organization in Canada, which itself actually hasn't even been involved in much armed resistance in recent decades. And so here you have a grassroots a political organization, Canadian organization, that's just like overnight, without any ability to really defend itself or to respond to these claims, is just banned, and all banks, all individuals are no longer allowed to have relationship to this organization. So this is a pretty egregious example of state repression, and it's also obviously important to always look at it through the lens of what other groups aren't banned, which is the Israeli military is not a banned terrorist organization. There's these groups that support the Israeli military in Canada; they're not banned terrorist organizations, and yet you have a group opposing genocide, talking about Palestinian political prisoners. That is. But I think the repression more generally has been in Canada has been, the police have targeted all kinds of activists, and they've brought in all these conditions on activists, and they've ramped up this in Toronto. The hate crimes unit has been substantially ramped up, and that's really been targeted at Palestine solidarity. But for the most part, activists are winning. The courts are dropping the cases, and activists are winning, even if they have to go through a year of conditions and a year of hassle and effort. But at this point, the repression is not as severe as in the U.S.
Carney just met with President Trump and is much heralded for telling him Canada is not for sale. However, he was very careful to be tactful in his dealings with Trump. Is the image Carney projects as Canada needing to be strong and independent from the United States truly reflected in Canada's alliance, military and otherwise, with the United States?
No, Carney is trying to deceive the public. Polls show that the public is very angry at the US and obviously principally at Donald Trump for his everything from annexation threats to trade war and to his policies kind of more generally. Uh, and Mark Carney is acting rhetorically. He is saying we're getting tough on the U.S. while basically continuing all of Canada's alignment with the U.S. Empire. And right now, in the bombing of Yemen, Canada Operation Prosperity Guardian, there's a handful of Canadian troops that are part of assisting that, alongside, I believe, six or seven other countries that have been supporting the U.S. UK bombing for the past year or so of Yemen. You have, Canada in the West Bank through Operation Proteus, working with the U.S. security coordinator in building up this Palestinian Authority security force to oversee Israel's occupation. I mean, just basically, you could, look at Canada's role in Haiti, look at Canada's role in Lebanon and building up the military force in Lebanon as part of the U.S. project there. It just goes on and on. So the Carney does make these declarations of our old relationship is over, but in practice, Canada is the Canadian military, specifically the intelligence agencies more generally. They are deeply, deeply integrated with the U.S. There are hundreds of accords between the Canadian and U.S. military. Canada, of course, is part of the Five Eyes, the international intelligence sharing arrangement with the U.S., UK, New Zealand, Australia. So no, the basically the corporate class, the capitalist class in Canada, they are troubled by Trump. They understand that Trump is totally erratic and that, you can't just sort of depend on business ties with the U.S. But they are also very much believe in the imperial white supremacist U.S. UK-led global domination, and Canada has been part of that project for more than a century. And so they want to basically navigate some of the economic things with the U.S. and they want to sort of get a little bit tough on that front, but they want to maintain the underlying geostrategic, geopolitical orientation. And Carney is sort of trying to navigate maintaining that relationship while speaking to the public that is increasingly hostile to the U.S.
So what are some of the ways Carney might shift Canada's trade and military cooperation away from being overly U.S. centric, and is he moving in that direction? Well, you said no, he's not, but let's assume he wants to appeal to the Canadian public. What choices does he have?
Well, he's got lots of choices. I mean, just the simple things like, and one thing he did do that's positive, he announced a review of the Canada's F-35 fighter jet purchase. And that came out basically because Lockheed Martin and the U.S. government basically control the source code, and they have effectively the capacity to shut down Canadian fighter jets. So on one hand, you have the U.S. government threatening to annex Canada, and then you're buying fighter jets supposedly for defense. In reality, it's not about defense. In reality, it's about interoperability with the U.S. and assisting the U.S. Empire globally. So he announced a review of that because the sort of anti-American sentiment picking up. All kinds of stuff with regards to military procurement would be low-hanging fruit. If they don't stop buying from Boeing, stop buying from Lockheed Martin, stop buying from these big U.S. Military companies, and we're talking about tens and tens of billions of dollars, and you can make very good security arguments for it, let alone trade war arguments as well. Why would we fund the U.S. while U.S. companies while there's a trade war against us kind of idea? So those are simple things. The other simple things, I mean, just really simple things like officer exchanges. You have all these dozens and dozens of Canadian officers, military, who are in the States, who often lead U.S. missions. I mean, during the Iraq War, Canadian was in charge of 35,000 troops in Iraq, a Canadian general who later becomes the chief of the defense staff of the Canadian military. So simple things like that, like ending officer exchanges, you just go on and on, Canadian naval vessels, or just backing away at a bigger picture geopolitical, backing away from supporting U.S. policy in Lebanon, from supporting Israel, which is partly because of U.S. pushing Canada in that direction. So there's lots of I think really simple things to do, but they're not actually interested in breaking away from the U.S. Empire. They are interested in rhetorically going in that direction. The only way it's gonna really shift is if there's a big push from below in terms of demanding an independent foreign policy and demanding a foreign policy that is actually respects international law and human rights.
Carney was not a political insider in the way that Poilievre is. This can be an advantage in that it breaks from the status quo, but it can also be a handicap if one is not experienced in how to build alliances to achieve one's goals. How do you view Carney in this regard?
Yeah, well, I would say like on Palestine, for instance, I think there's maybe I'm being too optimistic here, but I do think there's a little bit of an opportunity because he hasn't declared himself like other liberal politicians who were vying for the leadership of the Liberal Party and the prime ministership. I think that so that does offer some opportunity, I'm cautiously optimistic that there will be a somewhat of a backing away. I think that I think what Carney did with Trump yesterday at the White House. I don't at all support his comments about appreciating Trump to having Canada reinvigorate its military and its role in NATO. I don't agree with that at all. But I do think he actually did deal with the erratic kind of nature of Trump fairly effectively, within the box of the unjust world we live in. So I think that was a sign of Carney actually being somewhat skilled in doing that. Now, this guy he was the chair of Brookfield Asset Management. This is I think it's a $900 billion investment firm, one of either Canada's biggest or one of its biggest investment firms. This is somebody who was obviously the bank, governor of the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England. This is somebody who comes from the capitalist elite. This is not somebody who is looking to change make life any more difficult for billionaires or change the unequal world we live in any sort of serious way. So I don't expect without a whole lot of pressure that he will shift. And to be further, the traditional idea is the Liberal Party campaigns to the left and then governs to the right. They speak sort of, leftish kind of language to public to get votes, and then but the reality is Carney actually, to a large extent, campaigned to the right. He got rid of an increase on capital gains tax. He got rid of the carbon tax, and so he pursued a whole bunch of things right away that were I think, conceding to the Conservative Party and conceding to the more pro-corporate segments. But yeah, I think in terms of I don't think there's going to be a big problem from the standpoint of his sort of political skills. I think there's a bigger problem is his political ideological orientation.
On another note, since we last spoke on this show, you were apprehended and incarcerated based on false accusations by a Zionist fanatic that you were, who claimed that you were harassing her, although you have never met her in your life. Can you update us on your case?
Yeah, so about 2.5 months ago, the Montreal police called me to say that they were going to charge me two charges related to harassing this fanatic Zionist influencer, Dahlia Kurtz. And all I'd ever done is post in response to her X posts. I don't even follow her on X. I've never direct messaged her, never called her, never talked to her, never met her. I only became aware of her maybe a year or so ago amidst the slaughter in Gaza. And I obviously never threatened her in any way. I just basically responded in often biting political way, but completely political in response. And she's really serious anti-Palestinian, serious proponent of violence. And so they charged me, and then or they asked me to come in the next day to be charged. And then I wrote about it, and there was a action alert calling on the police to drop the charges. And the police's response the next day, they received thousands of emails saying to drop the charges, and their response was to bring in four charges, accusing me now of harassing the Montreal police. Anyways, I spent 5 days in jail, not over the case itself, but over the conditions that they were trying to impose upon me, which was to basically not be able to mention the name of the Zionist influencer Dalia Kurtz. And I won it. I got the conditions dropped, but the case itself is all still there. There was supposed to be with a court hearing on April 25th. It was just postponed to mid-July, and in mid-July there'll be some sort of there should be at least a date set for the trial. In informal discussions between my lawyer and the prosecution, they've already raised the possibility of dropping some stuff. We'll see where this all goes. I mean, it's all kind of farcical. I mean, we're like literally just talking about like Twitter posts, and then in the case of the police, I've never met the police investigator. I don't know the name. I never knew the first name, and I don't even remember the last name of the police investigator. They're now accusing me of harassing. But it obviously is part of the repression against Palestine. It's there's an inference of anti-Semitism, of course, is kind of in the background of it, it in a somewhat just world, the Montreal police would be spending some time investigating all these Canadians, these Montrealers who've gone over to the Israeli military to participate in the genocide in Gaza. They would be investigating these schools here in Montreal that are inducing Canadian kids to join the Israeli military in violation of Canada's Foreign Enlistment Act. But in the pro-genocide, pro-apartheid world that we live in, they've sort of participated in this Zionist influencer, who I should say never even blocked me on Twitter. If she wanted to stop me from being able to post in response to her, she could just block me. She never even did that. Instead, she goes to the police. It's obviously part of this sort of a lawfare Zionist campaign.
My understanding that this was a case that the prosecutor did not think had the evidence to be pursued until Conservative Party candidate and lawyer Neil Oberman wrote a letter to the police asking it to be followed up on. Is that the case?
That's exactly correct. Dalia Kurtz went to the police in the summer of last year. They opened an investigation. They concluded there wasn't enough evidence to warrant any charges. Then Neil Oberman on December 14th, I think the letter was sent this letter sort of pressuring the police, and then they opened the file back up and then moved forward. Neil Oberman, I should say, he did lose. He lost his during the election his bid to be an MP in Mount Royal here in Montreal. And he's this prominent Zionist lawyer who's targeted McGill. He's targeted the Montreal police. He's targeted the mayor of Montreal. He's been at least a dozen. Max Blumenthal, U.S. journalist, sent a threatening letter. He's been involved in all these different against the encampment at McGill. He also just lost another case around the student union at McGill. So yeah, he's this prominent Zionist lawyer that is assisting Dalia Kurtz in her campaign to try to shut me up.
From what I understand, also following the elections, she's vowing to emigrate to Florida. Well, how will this impact your upcoming hearing?
I don't know. I don't know exactly, and that's what I wrote about this because to be honest with you, a part of me doesn't want them to drop the charges with regards to Dahlia Kurtz because I'd like to actually see her testify and have, be open to cross-examination. I don't know, it just speaks to how kind of unhinged she is. I don't know if she has moved to Florida or not. She made this grand declaration that the Islamists have taken over Canada in response to the Liberal Party winning and stuff like that, and that she's got to move off to Florida. Um, I don't know what will come of this. I have to imagine that the prosecutor, when they see this kind of stuff, they don't want to continue with the case because they will ultimately, I think, embarrass themselves in front of a judge when if they try to put her on the stand. And of course, I don't know how you could find me guilty of harassing somebody without that person testifying in some way that what happened to them. So, but we'll see how this plays out.
To read more commentary from Yves, you can go to his website, yvesengler.com, where there is a list of his books and all of his latest articles. Yves, I want to thank you for coming on Arab Talk again.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Well, that's the voice in the face of Yves Engler discussing the recent upset victory of Liberal Party candidate Mark Carney. Well, Carney, ran on this so-called liberal, somewhat progressive platform, as he discussed, really arguing about a foreign policy that is truly a force for good. Yet when push comes to shove, Jamal, Carney's stance in relation to Palestine, maybe it's not as good as he claimed.
Well, it's not obvious so far, but he hasn't done much, to change it. And my prediction, it's because it's ingrained within the government. It doesn't matter which government in Canada. But I'm hopeful that he's totally different, and I am sure I'm actually 100% hopeful because the other option was horrible, Jess, and it was a shocking surprise for those who didn't want to elect Carney. So it's also a contrast to what happened right here in the United States, because the U.S. is moving to the right, Canada is moving to the left. So we'll see the difference hopefully in the near future.
Well, actually, the whole world is moving a bit to the left, Jamal. Mexico is moving to the left. Europe is moving to the left. We've seen international condemnation of the Israeli genocide and its actions in Gaza. And when we get to the story about, Eden Alexander, we see that even Trump now is making moves. When was the last time an American president spoke directly with Hamas? So it's an interesting development.
Not sure if an American president spoke to them, but the administration had some contacts. We should make that clear.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's not. But yeah, it's and that's actually, our story here, which is basically the news of the day. Hamas said it had released Alexander, Edan Alexander, as a goodwill gesture towards U.S. President Donald Trump, who is going to be visiting Arab Gulf nations this week. And fighting briefly stopped to allow for the handover. And then that's after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel would permit safe passage for the release. Imagine. I mean, it's like he's doing everybody a favor by allowing one of his soldiers a safe passage.
Joke. It's a joke.
And someone who is also an American citizen, like he's doing a favor. And of course, I read in the Israeli press, one of their major Israeli political analysts, Akiva Aldar, talked about the release, which was spurred with joy and as well as frustration in Israel. And he said, what we see is that what President Trump can do, Netanyahu is not able or not willing to do. And that's the reality. I mean, and we can go even further with this, but we're limited with time here. But I think there is a fissure that is between the Trump administration and Benjamin Netanyahu, including statements that we've heard from his envoy in the region saying to the families of the hostages, Witkoff, when he met with them, that look, we want to do our best to release the hostages, but Benjamin Netanyahu just wants to continue the war. And that's the reality. That's the reality that we've been witnessing. He doesn't want to see an end to this war. It's not about the hostages, as he claims. It's about killing everybody, basically, in Gaza, destroying Gaza, dividing it, creating it to make it uninhabitable for Palestinians to live there. And if it wasn't for, I would say, in this case, Trump intervention, that soldier would not have been released.
Yeah, and the real story here is not this American Israeli soldier who, after high school, decided to join the Israeli military. That's a whole other story, Jamal. But we may save that for later. But the real story here, as you said, is the chasm, the split between the Trump administration and Netanyahu and his right-wing extremist government, because it's not just that they did this deal. They didn't tell Netanyahu. The administrations, had representatives in Doha speaking directly with Hamas representatives. They're also doing a deal with, or at least negotiating with Iran right now, contrary to what Netanyahu wants. They also did a deal with the Houthis, contrary to what Netanyahu and his government is doing. So it seems like there's all this movement and all this direction globally that Trump is taking a stand that is really against or very different from what Netanyahu wants. It's a very interesting strategy. I don't want to give Trump too much credit, Jamal, but he is the first president to go against the Israeli prime minister in recent memory. I mean, the last president to do this, we don't even know. Who was it? We can't even think about it in our own memory, yet Trump is doing it.
I can think of actually George Bush Senior.
Oh, the first, yeah.
And also Ronald Reagan. Reagan.
Well, how many years ago is that, Jamal?
Many, many years ago.
Right? Yeah, that's decades and decades ago, okay? So that's the 80s. So we've had this kind of, and again, we don't want to give Trump too much credit, but, credit due when it's appropriate. Biden was a complete disaster and fomented this genocide, supported it, gave billions of dollars in aid to Israel, including the 2,000-pound bombs that are killing Palestinian civilians every day. Trump, is putting pressure on Netanyahu and the Israeli government unlike any other president in recent memory. It's an interesting development, doing deals with the Houthis, with the Iranians, speaking with Hamas representatives in Doha. That's a radical change, Jamal, if you really think about it.
It is. And so hopefully he can force them into a ceasefire. So yesterday, Jess, it's been 3 years ago since an Israeli soldier killed a Palestinian-American journalist, Shireen Abu Akleh. His identity was hidden until now. And so there is a documentary that has been released, Who Killed Shireen Abu Akleh. It aired on Al Jazeera. And this was basically a investigative journalism which was set to uncover exactly who was behind the killing, a secret closely guarded by Israel up to now. And now we know who killed them. But before we talk about who killed her, the administration of former U.S. President Joe Biden had concluded early on that an Israeli soldier had intentionally targeted her, but that conclusion was overruled internally, and this is to basically a testimony by someone who was at the administration, but they didn't release the name. So, of course, as we all know, and we've spoken about this, Israel initially tried to deflect the blame for the incident, suggested that Palestinian fighters killed her, but it eventually walked back that claim and acknowledged its troops were responsible for her death, saying that it was an accident. That's a pattern that we've seen. deny, lie, and then if you get caught red-handed with a video or evidence, you say it was a mistake or it's an accident. So it took them a year to say that the Israel military said it was deeply sorry for the death of Abu Akleh, and said it would not launch criminal proceedings against the soldiers. So now, two Israeli soldiers identified the soldier who shot Abu Akleh. That's their testimony as Alon Skegio, who was promoted after he killed her to captain and moved to another unit after the shooting. But according to them, he was killed in combat in June of 2024 in Jenin.
Right.
I mean, the crazy thing about it, Jess, it's not just this. Okay, this is the story because we know the pattern with Israel. They'll deny and lie until they cannot dispute the evidence. Is that the Biden administration took no action,
Exactly.
kind of like swept it under the rug, and that's an American citizen, and we see here like going the extra mile to get an American citizen out of Gaza, who willingly, volunteered in the Israeli military. I mean, he's a soldier.
Well, I
And
guess,
then when it
Jamal.
comes to a Palestinian American
Right.
who's a journalist, Shireen Abu Akleh, getting killed, sniped, murdered, shot in the head, they don't pursue anything afterwards. I mean, isn't this crazy?
Well, I just want to clarify something you said. You said the Biden administration didn't do anything. Actually, they did quite a bit. They covered it up. As you said, their own internal analysis came to the conclusion that Israel deliberately killed and murdered, if not assassinated, Shireen Abu Akleh, American, Palestinian citizen. And I remember when this was going on, because this is when Blinken and Biden were directly involved, because it came through the State Department, and Blinken overruled, this conclusion, and Biden went completely along with it. Yeah, it's part of the Biden complicity with this genocide, Jamal, and this disastrous foreign policy, which the majority of Americans are against. This pro-Israel American foreign policy, they are completely against it. The majority of Americans are against it, and I guess there are some worthy American citizens, Jamal. I guess a Jewish American citizen, Israeli American citizen, they're worthy of the United States doing things. But if you're a Palestinian American, I guess what does that mean? That we're not full citizens if we get into trouble? I mean, I've had this experience. You and I have both had this experience. I've been stuck at checkpoints getting into Gaza and have called the American embassy and have been told flat out that there's nothing they can do to help me as an American citizen. So we see the asymmetry here in how American citizens are treated.
I should also add that the Biden administration, or President Biden, refused to meet with her family, because that's another thing. I mean,
Right. They tried to meet with Blinken in the State Department too, and it was all refused.
I don't know about Blinken, but I know for sure Biden. I mean,
Yeah.
I think they might have met eventually with Blinken, but
Oh, okay. Well, nothing
definitely
happened though.
nothing happened. I mean, nothing happened. I mean, again, this is 3 years later now. We know who murdered her. Of course, too late, because according to Israel, I don't know if the story is true or not, that the soldier who killed her was killed himself.
Yeah, who
So
knows?
but that's the story. But when it did happen, and when Israel confessed that they had this killing, I mean, even I go back to simple law right here in the United States. If you accidentally kill someone, whether you're driving a car or something, you're still held for manslaughter. You're still held accountable. And this is someone who shoots and kills an American journalist, and they don't do anything about it.
Well, I mean, there's a documentary. I think I don't know if you mentioned that, but this whole story is based on a documentary that's going to be coming out about Shireen and about her murder and about the whole situation in which
It is
uh,
out. It is out. Who
yeah,
killed
yeah,
Shireen Abu Akleh?
yeah, and we want to encourage people to go see it. It's a very compelling documentary.
So the number of Palestinians killed by Israel, and this is, pay attention to the dates. It's from October 7, 2023 to June 30th. So we're talking about information that is more than
Almost a year old.
almost a year old. So I just want to make sure that we don't think it's today, because the number is much higher. But this is according to the Lancet, because they did a study. They're way behind. Takes time to collect all the data, all the information. But that gives you a solid indication. So the number they say, it's as high. It could be as high as 109,000 people killed, and not the figure at the time, which was, I think, about 52,000. So fast forward to now, which you've said almost a year later, you could imagine that number jumping over 200,000. And I think this is significant because people talk about numbers between 55 and 60,000 and so on, but apparently it's not. There are so many people under the rubble. There are people who are missing. They haven't been accounted for. And there are people who are still dying from injuries
And
and
illness,
and
injuries, illness, and starvation, Jamal.
exactly, that's not accounted for. So the number is going to be terrifying. Jess. Now we have the starvation, that children are dying, being starved to death. And that's just basically, I wanted to mention this today in our today's discussion, because I believe a year from now, we'll be talking about horrifying numbers. And when people talk about genocide, and there was pushback, I see less pushback now, but still some politicians keep having that pushback from using the term genocide. It is a terrible genocide.
Yeah, but I think you're right to point that out, that there's been a change, a slight waking up of the moral conscience of some European politicians. Some former EU officials, even this week, finally came out and said, well, this is clearly a genocide. But, looking at these numbers, Jamal, and looking at the gravity of the situation and the complete inability of the EU, the United States, the United Nations to get any traction to let food, water, and medicine in, to get this genocide to be stopped, is really disturbing. I mean, these numbers from the Lancet are truly disturbing. And, I talked about it a little earlier. It's what we call the downstream effects of the genocide. You have the death and destruction from say a bomb dropping and killing people immediately. But when you factor in, which is what the Lancet article did, factor in all these other causes: starvation, illness, untreated medical consequences from being injured. I mean, the number is going to be astronomical when we're looking back at a year from now. And no matter, even if the genocide stopped today, Jamal, the impact of the starvation and the impact of all the injuries, the impact of the amputees, the impact of everything is going to cause hundreds of thousands of Palestinian civilians to die, and to die prematurely. I mean, this is catastrophic. And we still can't get any movement anywhere in the world to put the Israelis in their place. They're basically given carte blanche. I mean, let's look at what happened just this last week, Jamal. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu ordered tens of thousands of more soldiers to go into Gaza to reoccupy and re-prosecute this genocide. They're going to go in full force. No one's stopping them. So, what's next in store? I mean, I don't see anything.
Well,
It gets
also
to next door.
adding to this picture that's happening in Gaza and the starvation. Just this week, the World Central Kitchen issued a
Yeah.
press release that they ran out of ingredients. They cannot feed the hungry. They cannot do anything there because all the trucks, all their ingredients are stuck outside of Gaza. Israel is preventing them from entering. And we talked about the World Central Kitchen also, just to remind our listeners that they
Right.
were also, their workers were attacked and killed by Israel. That's another another so-called mistake, that Israel made in killing their workers, but they're still on the ground. They have shipments, lining up outside to come in so they can feed these poor people. And if anyone has been looking at the internet recently, looking at these children, their malnutrition, you could see the evidence. They're basically skeletons. You're looking at babies who are skeletons, yes, because they don't have food. And Benjamin Netanyahu, just today, after the release of the American-Israeli hostage, said we're going to continue the killing, and they did. And we're not going to lift the siege. And one of the priorities of President Trump, he said that he wants to make sure that food gets in. So we'll see if this is going to happen or not, because we're going to be, again, we're on another catastrophe in the making. We're waiting to be witnessed by the paralyzed world.
Yeah, the world is paralyzed from being able to do anything. I think the words coming from politicians and world leaders right now are so morally bankrupt. I mean, all of us have been screaming for months and months, going on 19 months now, that this is a genocide, do something about it. And there has been a lack of political will to condemn the genocide. And actually, something even more disturbing has happened. The attacks on Palestinians, the attacks on pro-Palestine activists and solidarity workers has only increased. And that's not part of our story today, obviously, but we see attacks on universities. We see attacks within workplaces. We see anybody who's representing, who is anti-genocide, who is saying, stop this murderous campaign, is being attacked viciously within the United States. So, Jamal, we got to keep speaking because it's this crazy world right now. And just to add insult to injury, I'm sorry to say this, in this last week, I was nauseated to see that Joe Biden is back on the political stage, giving a speech. He has the audacity, after participating in this genocide and creating the context for giving us Donald Trump for another 4 years, to come back on the political stage. Wow.
Well, I mean, do you know what's the big story today in the media? It's the story of Qatar gifting Trump a 747.
And $100 million plane, yeah.
Yeah, that's the big story. I don't care.
Who cares?
I mean, who cares? They, they talk about this like as if it's a big disaster, when we're seeing people are dying from starvation, and that's the big story. So what if the United States is going to receive a gift from Qatar? The United States also gives gifts. Well, they give a lot of gifts to Israel, but they also give gifts other places. But I'm like astonished to see that this is the big story. They're not talking about the starvation. They're not talking about the bombing. They're not talking about the genocide. That's like the headline news for the day.
Well, that's the insulting thing, right, Jamal? We want to talk about this plane while Palestinian children are starving to death, while 10,000 Palestinians in the West Bank, Jamal, have been uprooted just in the last few months. Uprooted from their homes and villages in the West Bank by illegal colonial Israeli settlers, many of whom are American citizens. So, and 210 Palestinian journalists have been murdered. More journalists have been murdered by Israel than in the entirety since when records have been kept in this short period of time. So, yeah, the media, I mean, keep showing Joe Biden and talking about plans. That plan by the Democrats to put out Joe Biden and to complain about an airplane, they're just digging themselves in a deeper hole and have no political direction whatsoever.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest shows, and we'll talk to you next week.
We'll see you next week.